After being hit and left to die, her spirit returned to haunt them without mercy. The film opens by introducing a man named Tun. Tun is a photographer who has a girlfriend named Jane, a final-year college student, and there is a fairly large age gap between them. That day, they are hanging out with three of Tun's college friends, Yunop, Jim, and Mung, at Yunop's wedding reception. After chatting and reminiscing about their college days, Tun and Jane head back to their apartment. Suddenly, by accident, they hit a female college student who is trying to cross the road. Jane initially wants to check on the girl's condition, but she is stopped by Tun, who refuses to take responsibility and forces Jane to flee the scene, leaving the girl lying on the road. "What song are you listening to? I told you to drive." The next morning, Tun is hired to photograph the graduation ceremony of Jane's close friend Nu, who graduates earlier than her. During a group graduation photo session, Tun briefly sees the apparition of a young woman. After returning to the apartment, Tun immediately develops the photos from his analog camera. Meanwhile, Jane is still angry at Tun because she keeps thinking about the girl they hit, while Tun acts as if nothing ever happened. Since the incident, Jane has trouble sleeping because she feels extremely guilty for not checking on the girl, who might have still been alive and could have been saved, especially since Jane was the one driving the car. Tun then goes to his regular photo printing shop owned by a man named Josh to pick up the graduation photos, but several of the pictures show strange white shadows. Tun assumes Josh's equipment is faulty, but it turns out the shadows are already present on Tun's negative film. Back at the apartment, Jane notices the door to the photo developing room moving and assumes Tun is inside. When she enters, she finds no one there, but strangely, the sink faucet turns on and water begins to overflow. As Jane tries to turn it off, a long-haired head appears from inside the sink, begging for help. It turns out to be only a dream. After Tun comes home, he shows Jane Nu's graduation photos that contain many white shadows, until Jane is shocked when she sees one of the group graduation photos and notices the figure of a female spirit, which she believes is the same girl they hit that night. Tun dismisses it as an ordinary shadow caused by a damaged camera and says he will fix it later. While Jane remains uneasy, Tun invites her to find out what happened to the girl. They visit a public cemetery, hoping to identify her body from accident photos posted on a notice board, but they fail to find her. On their way home, they pass the road where the accident occurred and see workers repairing an advertising billboard pole that had previously been hit by their car. Tun pretends to ask who hit the pole and whether anyone was injured, but one of the workers says no one was hurt and only the billboard was damaged. In addition, Tun's friends have already checked several hospitals for the girl, yet no accident victims were admitted that night. Tun and Jane grow increasingly confused about what truly happened to the girl they hit. Back at the apartment, Tun examines the figure appearing in the graduation photos and shows it to Josh, who explains that it is merely overlapping imagery caused by Tun's poor camera focus. Meanwhile, Jane, still troubled, skips her classes and comes across a magazine that discusses ghost photography. Later, Tun picks Jane up and complains that his neck has been hurting badly since the accident. Jane then tells Tun about the ghost photo magazine and invites him to visit the publisher's residence. There, they are shocked to learn that all the ghostly images published in the magazine are actually edited. The publisher, Apicard, admits that he doesn't know the truth and deliberately fabricated the photos because they are popular with readers and sell well. However, that does not mean real ghost photos do not exist, as Apicard keeps several authentic ones that he has never published. One of them is a childhood photo of himself with his father, in which the figure of his mother can be seen standing behind a door, taken shortly after she passed away. According to Apicard, spirits sometimes long for the people they love, and he believes that the presence of a spirit in a photograph is actually an attempt to convey a message, and that the spirit is always connected to someone in the photo.
After that, Tun continues his work by doing a pre-wedding photo shoot at a studio. When the session is over and Tun is alone in the studio, the lights suddenly turn on and off by themselves. As the pain in his neck worsens, Tun goes to the hospital, and the nurses are briefly confused when he steps on the scale to measure his weight. After an X-ray examination, the doctor says that Tun's neck is actually fine and that the pain is likely caused by a sprained neck muscle from the accident. As a precaution, Tun's neck is put in a brace that day, and he is given pain medication. Tun becomes increasingly obsessed with the spirits appearing in his photographs, and later that afternoon, when he picks Jane up from her classroom, he sees Jane vomiting blood. Once again, it turns out to be just a dream. Tun calms himself by drinking some water, but not long after that, someone comes to his apartment. It is Unap, one of Tun's college friends, who arrives in a dazed state and says that he is going to die. Unap also asks for the photographs that Tun took of him in the past, and worried about his condition, Tun immediately calls Unap's wife to come and pick him up. However, before the call connects, Unap suddenly leaves the apartment without a word. When Jane returns home, she notices something strange in Nua's graduation photos, namely, a white shadow that always appears in the window of the same room. Without wasting any time, Jane heads straight to her campus and enters that room, which turns out to be a laboratory. Using a Polaroid camera, Jane takes pictures of the entire room in search of clues, until she finally sees an apparition at the end of a shelf. Jane becomes terrified after hearing a scream right behind her, and suddenly a framed picture falls to the floor. The frame contains a photo of a female student from 1995 named Natra, who had received an award. Upon seeing Natra's face, Jane immediately recalls the accident and becomes convinced that the girl she hit was Natra. After learning that Natra studied in the same year as her boyfriend Toon, Jane checks Toon's college memory album and finds several photos of Natra inside. Most shockingly, Jane also discovers a photo of Toon together with Natra. Meanwhile, Toon, still troubled by thoughts of Unap, goes to Unap's apartment. When there is no response after knocking, Toon enters and finds the place in complete disarray, with Unap's mating photos scattered everywhere. Once again, many white shadows can be seen covering Unap's face in all of the photos. Toon then spots Unap standing on the balcony of the apartment, and suddenly Unap jumps from the height of the building. Toon is devastated by Unap's death, and after the police evacuate the body, Unap's wife arrives and explains that Unap had been depressed for several days because he felt haunted by the spirit of a woman. She also reveals that Toon's other college friends, Jim and Mung, have also committed suicide after suffering from similar depression. Inside the car, Toon is still in shock over the deaths of his three friends when Jane shows him the photo of Toon together with Natra and asks who the woman really is, as Jane is convinced that Natra is the female spirit appearing in the graduation photos. This means that Natra's spirit is also the one haunting Unap, Jim, and Mung, which is evident from the white shadows seen in Unap's wedding photos, a sign that Unap had already become Natra's target. Toon finally confesses that during college he met Natra, a very quiet girl with no friends who was considered strange by others. Over time, as they met more often, Toon and Natra began dating, but Toon kept their relationship secret from everyone, including his three friends. Natra loved Toon deeply and even gave him a camera as a gift because she knew about his passion for photography. On the other hand, Toon did not love Natra as much, and after they had made love, Toon gradually grew bored and slowly distanced himself from her. Arguments followed, and Natra went as far as cutting her own arm, after which Toon, already fed up, ended their relationship. Hearing this story, Jane is still confused as to why Toon's three friends were haunted, but Toon admits that he does not know the reason either, and that Natra disappeared without a trace after they broke up. Now, Toon is terrified, convinced that he will be the next victim.
Therefore, in order to resolve the situation, Tun and Jane decide to go to Natra's house to obtain more information. After obtaining Natra's address from the campus administration, the two of them head to Natra's house, which is located quite far from Bangkok. Suddenly, Natra's spirit appears again, visible only to Tun, prompting him to step on the gas and drive faster. Fortunately, they survive the journey and arrive safely at Natra's house, where Tun and Jane meet Natra's mother, Anna. They introduce themselves as Natra's friends, and when they are invited inside, Anna strangely claims that her daughter Natra is asleep because she's not feeling well. Tun and Jane are confused, knowing full well that Natra is already dead and that her spirit has been haunting them. While Anna continues cooking, Tun recklessly goes upstairs to look for Natra's room, with Jane following closely behind. On the second floor, they find many bottles of formalin, and when they enter Natra's bedroom, they are horrified to discover that her body has already turned into a skeleton lying on the bed, complete with her comb, glasses, and other personal belongings, all of which Anna carefully arranges every day. Anna admits that she still cannot accept her daughter's death, which is why Natra's body has been left there and preserved with formalin, and she has even refused to have her cremated. Tun then shows Anna the photos of Natra's spirit taken on campus, explaining that Natra's soul cannot rest peacefully because she has not been properly laid to rest. Eventually, Anna changes her mind, and Natra's funeral ceremony is held. Through Anna's brother, Tun and Jane finally learn the chronology of Natra's death. It turns out that Natra left her studies in Bangkok and returned home, but she appeared deeply depressed and barely spoke at all. No one knew the reason behind her condition, until one day Natra took a large amount of medication and overdosed, prompting Anna to rush her to the hospital. Although Natra survived, after regaining consciousness from her coma, she suddenly committed suicide by jumping from the roof of the hospital. Since her daughter's death, Anna's mental state deteriorated, causing her to believe that Natra was still alive, which frightened the local residents and led everyone to avoid speaking to her. Not long after, Tun shudders as he feels Natra's spirit standing right behind him. After the prayer ceremony is completed, the cremation process is scheduled to take place a few days later. Tun and Jane return to their home, but Tun is unable to sleep soundly as he is still haunted by thoughts of Natra's spirit. Suddenly, Natra's apparition appears directly in front of him. Terrified, Tun runs out of the apartment, but Natra's spirit continues to torment him. When the elevator refuses to open, Tun is forced to go down using the emergency stairs, yet he keeps ending up on the same floor. Eventually, Tun encounters Jane, but she turns out to be Natra's spirit, who accuses Tun of heartlessly abandoning her. Desperate, Tun climbs down an exterior ladder attached to the building's wall, but Natra continues to follow him. As a result, Tun loses his grip and falls from a great height. Fortunately, he survives, though he must be hospitalized after suffering a broken arm. Jane later informs Tun that Natra's body will be cremated that very day, believing that all the terror they have endured will finally come to an end. The two of them attend the cremation, and Tun briefly recalls the happy moments he once shared with Natra. A few days later, after Tun and Jane go on a refreshing beach vacation together, Jane visits Josh's photo shop to print all the photos from their trip stored in her camera. Jane is delighted while looking at the vacation photos, but she becomes shocked when she sees other pictures showing Jane and Tun sleeping on the sofa, with Natra's spirit visible in the frames.
Jane eventually realizes that when the photos are combined and flipped like a flip book, Natra's spirit can be seen crawling toward a bookshelf, as if sending Jane a message to check it. Without hesitation, Jane examines the bookshelf and finds a collection of negative films. When the films are developed, horrifying images emerge that deeply shock Jane, revealing photographs of Natra being raped. The scene then flashes back to the past, showing Unop, Jim, and Mung getting drunk on campus late at night. They enter a laboratory where Natra is still working overtime. When Unop forces her to drink alcohol, Natra immediately strikes Unop on the head with a vase. Enraged, Unop orders Jim and Mung to hold Natra down while he begins his depraved act. Not long after, Tun arrives and is horrified to see Natra being raped by his own friends. However, Unop forces Tun to photograph Natra, using the photos as a threat so she would never dare report the incident to anyone. Tun complies because he chooses to protect his friends rather than Natra. Jane is disgusted and furious with Tun for committing such a barbaric act. Tun admits that he has never been able to forgive himself for what happened, but Jane, no longer caring, leaves him. Knowing that Natra's spirit is still around, Tun challenges her to show herself while he continues taking photos around the apartment. Yet Natra's spirit does not appear at all. Overwhelmed by anger and depression, Tun throws the Polaroid camera, which accidentally takes a photo of himself. When Tun sees the developed image, he shudders in terror and recalls the past. Natra recalls the pain in his neck, as well as the nurse's confusion when she saw his weight reach 120 kilograms, realizing that all this time, Natra's spirit has been sitting on his shoulders. When Tun looks toward the mirror, Natra finally reveals herself, covers Tun's eyes, and deliberately causes him to lose his balance, leading to Tun falling from the height of the apartment building. In the final scene of the film, Jane is seen speaking with a doctor at a mental hospital about Tun's condition. She then visits Tun, who sits weakly on the bed with his head wrapped in bandages, mentally disturbed and hunched over. Jane can only cry as she looks at her lover. As Jane enters the room and the door slowly closes, Natra is seen reflected in the glass, still sitting on Tun's shoulders, and the story comes to an end.